Hello dear friends, today I've got a lovely project. I've got some condensed milk cans and I'm going to be doing some napkin decoupage on them just to decorate them. One I would like to use is a little sort of pencil storage container. I don't really want it for pencils, but I've got quite a lot of tools like pokey tools and things which are shorter than the standard size tins and pencil holders, and they kind of get lost. So I'd like a tin for one of those, and then I want to just make a little pot plant that I'm going to pot up for a friend. I have some lovely napkins. This one is an agapanthus, which is very special to me. They grow all along the roadside in Cape Town. I had them in my garden, and I must say I've just spent 2 years trying to propagate some from seed here in the UK. Normally you would just dig up and divide bulbs, but I haven't been able to have access to the bulbs, but I did get given some seeds. The first lot of seeds I planted, one of my trainees happily threw out because they felt it had taken far too long, and I now 2 years later have got some small, they dwarf agapanthus, but nevertheless I'm very happy to have them. I feel I've achieved something. And then I have this second napkin which has got this beautiful, very fresh sort of bird feel. It's just got 4 of the same sort of images on it, and I have already torn out this little birds with a watering can, and I've torn out the hearts, and also that little heart. I might put some of the birds, but I might also take another watering can. I'm not sure, or maybe even a little birdhouse. We'll just see. So I'm going to show you now how I painted the cans so that you've got an idea. And if you have a close look here, you will notice that the paint isn't very even. The first coat was just simply painted up and down with a brush, and the second coat I've stippled on, but let me show you how I did that. And I'm not fussed about this because the napkin's going to cover some of this, and I'm going to use some of the torn backing pieces of the napkin to cover some of the other areas. So I had already given my tins a coat of white paint. Well, this is the white, chalk finish paint. And I had painted the brush strokes up and down just with a regular sort of flat chisel brush. Now I'm taking a round brush and I'm going to just stipple the inside. Stippling is just another word for dabbing. So I'm just going to do this kind of effect. I don't want anything that's too perfect, because when we put the napkins and things on, there'll be little gaps, and if it's a little bit interesting by having a texture, I think that will actually work very nicely. So I'm just going to stipple this on, or if you want to call it, dab it on. And it does make the color of the paint look quite translucent when you put the wet paint on, but it will dry more opaque. And I'm just going to finish this off, going all the way around the edge. And as I say, because we're going to be covering it with a napkin, it actually doesn't need to be perfect. The next thing I'll need to do is to make sure that this is 100% dry, so I'll just leave this sitting outside, well, just out in the open to dry off. Unfortunately, today is not as warm as it's been the last couple of weeks, but that's not to say it won't dry quite quickly. Chalk paint does do that. But you want to make sure that even the thicker bits have dried, so that when you come to stick, things don't smudge. I'm going to do the underneath as well, because one thing I've learned with many, many years of doing crafts is that people do pick things up and turn them over. And although I'm going to probably use these as planters and make little holes in the bottom of the tins, just in case I decide that I'll use them as a storage container for pencils or something like that, I'll paint the bottom. So just giving it a once over, making sure everything's right. I'm going to set it down, and I'm just going to dab around the edges where my fingers were holding. And I'm going to leave both of those to dry before we carry on with the next step. So I have separated the top layer of my napkin from the other two that are behind it, and I have loosened some of my images here so that I've got them laid out in front of me. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just start sticking. I have a vague idea of what I want. I quite like these sort of postal images. So I'm going to start with this, and it's got a straight edge at the bottom, and I'm going to use that on the base, and I'm just going to hold that firmly between my hands, as firmly as I can with this delicate little napkin, Don't worry if it's not a complete image or if something tears, it's fine. I'm going to use matte medium, and I'm just going to simply paint it on fairly quickly so that I get the paper down, because paper has a tendency to stretch. So I want it secured onto my surface as quickly as possible. Always work with a wet brush, because that way you're guaranteed that you're not going to tear your paper. If your brush gets dry, it sometimes sticks, or your bristles stick into the napkin. And your paint will start to look translucent, but don't worry about that. It's going to dry to be a nice white after we've finished. So I've done that already, and you can see that that's come on quite nicely, and I like the fact that the back is mottled. So on the opposite side, I think I'm going to just slightly off the actual half mark, I'm going to put this little birdhouse, and again I'm going to put this on fairly quickly, getting it stuck down first and then coming in just quickly for the second coating. But because you've got small pictures, it's not going to be that difficult to do. And I am just simply using very delicate pressure on my brush. I've got a nice soft Taklon brush, which is synthetic bristles. I'm gently going to fold that over because that's white, and I'm gently going to brush this and fold this over. So what you would have noticed is that I'm not putting glue on underneath or matte medium on underneath. The napkin is so lovely and transparent that I can simply place it on top. Now I'm going to use my little birdhouse. I'm sorry, the watering can. I'm looking at the birdhouse, making sure that the head of the bird is actually on the can, because that would be awful if it was overlapping. And again, just getting this quickly down. And I'm sure you'll agree that this is a really nice quick project to do, especially if you've got to do lots of them. Lovely for gifts or market days, that kind of thing. The time that's most spent is actually painting the containers, strangely enough, so you could always do that the night before. So that's looking pretty good. And then I've got a little bit of space over here with not much color, so I think I'm just going to carry this flower across and put it over here. And you can overlap them as I'm doing, it's absolutely fine. And then I've got some pieces of the background of the napkin, and I'm just going to use these in random places just to fill in some of the background, not because it's adding any color, but you'll see when it's dry that it adds in a little bit of texture. I know you're saying it would make more sense if it had a color to it, but you'll see what I mean when it dries. I'm just using this background sheet to fill in some of the gaps. And do I need any more images? I don't think I want too much on here. I could, across the top here, use some wording like this cart postal. Let me put my little saucer here. Since that's a postmark at the bottom, one could almost assume this would be a bit like a post card of some sort. If you've got an imagination, you can see where I'm going. Sorry, I think in pictures, so it doesn't always make sense to everybody else, and that's not helpful. Anyway, so add a little bit of text in there. You could, of course, come in with some stamps. That would also be fine. And maybe at the bottom here, we could just put a little bit of text over that. Just try and get that to lay straight. Keep your brush wet at all times. Really does make a huge difference to the way your napkin is going to lie. If you do get wrinkles while you're working, then just make sure that you are leaving them. Don't try and overwork them. What you do want to look for, though, is just thick areas where you've got lots of matte medium, or if you are using Mod Podge, you don't want thick sort of stripes of Mod Podge. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to leave that, set it aside to dry, and I'm going to move on to work with the next one. So the second tin, I want to use this agapanthus on it, and I just love them because, as I mentioned to you, they're from my childhood. This napkin has got 2 plies, so I'm going to peel the 1 ply off completely, and these little sort of shadowy colors can be used in your junk journals, just especially over things like text in a book, because that will actually work quite nicely just to break up the surface of the text, give it another layer or dimension. What I'd like to check now is to see how this would look if I was to try and wrap it around. And this may or may not work. I'm doing absolutely upfront right at the beginning. So I'm going to just grab a ruler and I'm going to try and cut the bottom of that off. Because if I don't do that, it's going to be quite bulky to work with. So my tin is actually 8 centimeters tall. I might cut it slightly longer. I'm going to fold this in half so that I can cut through both layers at the same time. And I'm using scissors simply because I've got 2 straight edges on my can that I'm going to be working with. And this I'm eyeballing. I'm going to use this clean cut edge for the top. So I'm going to work on 9 centimeters. I'm just going to cut through here. Move my ruler along. It's not so easy to draw on these, that's why I'm doing it this way. And I'm just being absolutely upfront. This could go horribly wrong and I might have to redo it. So let's just see what happens. Right, so snip through to the end. I've got that for another project. Right, so the next thing I want to look at is how much of this I'm actually going to need. So if I'm starting here, try and leave that little white lip, come through around here. Probably want to, I don't want half a dragonfly. I don't mind his tail because that will look a bit like a stem. So let me make a fold there, and I'm just going to cut through this. Right, let's double check this. You know what they say, measure twice, cut once, but yeah, it's only a napkin. So that should work. I've got enough of an overlap there. Now the secret here is to actually find the center of your length of napkin, like that, and find a central point here. And you do want to try and hold it as level as possible. So I'm going to work on this section first, and I'm going to have to work quite quickly because my paper is going to want to just start buckling on this napkin. So I'm being very generous with my glue. I'm brushing up and down, getting it all as wet as possible because already you can see it wrinkling, and that's completely normal. Get the one side secured, put your hand inside of the tin just so that you're not getting sticky and lifting up the napkin. And using my brush with lots and lots of matte medium on it and being very firm as I press it down onto the surface of the tin. I'll worry about the pieces that are sticking past the bottom of the tin in a moment. So that has gone on reasonably well. But you can see when I say work quickly, I mean work quickly before all the wrinkles start. Right, I'm going to rotate this in my hand. I'm going to just try and keep my thumb on a section so that it doesn't go off the line of the top where I want to have a nice neat edge. And already it's stretching, so I'm just going to secure this as quickly as possible. It takes a little bit of practice. If you find that it doesn't work right the first time, just pop it under the tap, rinse it all off and start again. Most times in a napkin you would actually have enough to be able to do this a second time. I've done decoupage with napkins for quite a long period of time. I'm not saying that it doesn't go wrong sometimes, but it does. Sorry, I'm splashing the matte medium everywhere. Right, so that's gone on pretty well. I'm not going to touch the ends of this at this stage. And the ends, I mean these little bits that are sticking out. I am going to go around the edges to make sure that I have got them firmly in contact with that little ridge that's there, and around the top. I want to make sure that that's really nicely sealed. Keep your brushes wet. If I can say anything again, keep your brushes wet. Your brushes will be dry, you'll have problems. So we're just going to make sure it's pressed down against that ridge so we've got a nice clean edge all the way around. Rotate it in your hands. and then just smooth out any thick areas where you've got a lot of matte medium. Just make sure that you don't have any ridges. Like here, you could see that's on quite thickly. Just smooth that out, blend it, take some off if necessary. And then you're going to leave this to dry completely before we tackle this end that is just sticking out in the air. We'll come back to that. There we go. Right, so I'm going to use my fingers just to grab that, pop it down on my silicone mat, and I will see you when that is dry and show you how to finish it off. So my napkin has dried here with agapanthus, and I'm going to take an emery board using the fine sort of surface, and I'm just going to brush down almost at a 45-degree angle with this. And you'll see as I'm doing this, it's actually going to just start to wear away the napkin where it joins the actual tin, and that gives it a really lovely clean edge. Takes a little bit of patience, but you'll see that it's coming away without having to cut where you might actually create a jagged edge. It just gives you this lovely smooth finish. So I'm just going to work my way around this. It won't take terribly long. And then what I'll do for protection is I'm going to paint a layer of matte medium over the finished article that I've got here. So in other words, on top of the napkin again, just to give it a second coat. And that will be my finished product. For the one that I'm going to use as a planter, I'm just going to use my bradawl, or some of you know as an awl, and I'm just going to punch 3 little holes in the bottom of the tin so that I can actually put a little plant in when the time comes. I've got a friend's birthday coming up a little bit later in the month, and I want to give her something that's really nice. She hasn't got a lot of space, so it would have to be a windowsill plant. But I thought it would be nice if it's just in a pretty container. My thought with this is not to plant the plant directly into the tin, but to get a white pot that is just small enough to fit inside here, so that this will be the actual covering and will give it a nice finish. So I'm quite happy with how that's turned out. And if you have a look here, you've got a lovely clean edge with no sort of jagged bits. You haven't cut into the napkin, you haven't lifted anything off. And I'm just going to put a coat of the matte medium over that, and then I'm done. Right, so I've allowed my tins to dry completely. I gave them a coat of matte medium over the top off camera, and now I'm just going to add this light wax, chalk finish furniture wax over it. It's got a clear finish, which is great when you've got a nice white background. You don't want anything that's too grungy. So I'm just going to work all over this. It's quite a quick process. And because it's very quick and easy to do, and because the wax is water resistant, if this were on a table and you were to spill something on it, it would wipe off fairly easily. So that's number 1 already done. I'll just do the second one quickly. This is a lovely alternative way to finish something off other than using something like a deco varnish, which is absolutely fine. If you haven't got wax, by all means use your deco varnishes. Just if you're working on a white background, use something that's clear and seal it nicely so that you can actually make use of it. Sorry, let's fold this paper towel again. Wax will take a little bit of time just to dry. There we go, all nice and evenly on. Right, so thank you for joining me, guys. If you've liked this video, give me a thumbs up, consider subscribing to my channel, and please don't forget to switch the notification button on so that you get a notification each time I post a new video. It's normally every week. Right, thank you for joining me. Bye for now.